Wobens Pacius. The supporter sense the hat trick is on a touch. Wobens! Hat trick again in the Canadian Premier League. Felt like destiny.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the CanPL.ca Newsroom podcast. Mitchell Tierney here alongside Charlie O'Connor Clark to recap the week that was in the CPL. Ahead on the show, we'll talk about the Golden Boot race heating up, hat tricks, transfer news, stunning results, a lot more. But first, let's quickly go through just what happened since our last show because it was a lot. Cavalry FC, they scored 3 goals in 8 minutes to beat 10-man Halifax last Thursday. Ali Musi, he had a brace. Sergio Camargo scored in that match as well. On Friday, Pacific continued their scoring and winning ways with a 4-2 win over York United at York Lions Stadium. York actually had 2 leads in that match, courtesy of Ronan Krat and Ozaze de Rosario, but Alejandro Diaz hat trick and Gianni Santos gave the visitors a big win. Then a weekend off in the CPL, but busy start to this week as last night 2 matches. Forge, they scored 5 for the first time in club history in a 5-1 win over FC Edmonton. Wobens Pacius, he had a hat trick as well, while Abubakar Sissoko and Kyle Becker scored. Cairo Core added a goal for Edmonton. And then the shocker, Ozaze de Rosario scoring again. York scoring again in a 1-0 win over Cavalry, their first win since May 6th against Forge FC. Charlie, you know, I think we both consider ourselves experts to some degree on the Canadian Premier League, but this league is impossible to predict sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're 4 years in and I have no idea. But it was an awesome another week of games, 2 hat tricks. We just had so many goals. I think, what is that? It's 4 games and I think 16 goals. So about 4 per game, exactly 4 per game. Just what a weekend. We had a lot of pretty crazy results. I think the table doesn't make any more sense than it did the week before. There's still, so much to fight for every team. And it's just awesome to see goals flying in left, right, and center, unless probably if you're, one of the teams that was conceding all of them.
Yeah, no, certainly. I was at Tim Hortons Field last night. FC Edmonton did not look particularly thrilled, especially at halftime, to have the game go the way that it did. But someone who certainly was thrilled this past week was William Akio, who finally, it was confirmed that he is moving to Ross County, joining his brother Victor Loturi of Cavalry, or formerly of Cavalry, I suppose at this point, as well as Canadian Ben Patton. His brother Harry also used to play for that team as well. So a lot of Canadian connections over at Ross County. Make sure to go watch Christian Jack's excellent chat on Beyond the Pitch with Akio about the move, playing internationally in South Sudan, and plenty more. But Charlie, your thoughts on this move, what it means for Valor, and also what it means for Akio in the league?
Oh, it's awesome. It's been such a great summer, I think, for CPL players getting these moves. We mentioned Laturi, Diadine Abzi had that move out to France. But for Willie Akio in particular, it's a really cool story. I think, if you haven't seen KJ's interview with him, just go see that, where he tells the story about how he first got signed by Valor after his college career. He comes to Winnipeg. He basically goes on a tour of the stadium, and Rob Gale eventually gives him a chance at the club. It's just an awesome story. And it's really exciting to see clubs like Ross County, just looking so heavily at the Canadian League. Obviously they've been scouting Victor Laturi for a while, but then, they start taking a look at his brother William, and they want him as well. And it looks like these players are there to play as well. Laturi already has seen action for the first team in friendlies. He was on the bench for a League Cup game, I think either yesterday or the day before as we're recording. So it's just so exciting to see these players continue to get these moves to clubs at very good levels. And then from there, the sky's the limit, because it can be a stepping stone to even higher levels.
Absolutely. A lot of comments coming in, obviously, on the Akio transfer. But one interesting one coming from Atletico Ottawa head coach Carlos Gonzalez, who had this to say about Akio being on the move.
The CPL is giving great opportunities to everyone. I think it's not the first case of a player from the CPL that goes to Europe. And this talks really good about the level that we have here. A lot of the teams now in other parts of the world are focusing in the CPL because they know that there is young talent here and they are players that can develop in the future and that can be really good for the soccer and the football of the country. So I'm very happy to hear this type of notices, because this makes that everything have sense. The CPL was created also to give like this information to other places of the world of the football in Canada, and I think that the work that the people is doing here is great.
Yeah, and I think that certainly goes for coaches as well. I think that certainly Carlos Gonzalez is someone who I would imagine, if he can continue what he's done with Atletico Ottawa in recent weeks, there's going to be some people over in Europe who might be interested in him as well.
I think so eventually, and that is again part of the whole idea of the CDL, because not only are there about 200 or so new professional playing jobs in this country with this league, there's 8 new head coaching jobs that didn't exist before, and however many other assistant coaching jobs, and we've seen younger maybe coaches without as much professional experiences get those chances in this league. Carlos comes in, kind of maybe takes a risk. He's a very ambitious coach, but to come and join that project in Ottawa and to hit the ground running so well, it says a lot about him and about the faith the organization's shown in him. So again, this league is such a great place for anybody to really kind of showcase their talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of showcasing talent, Forge FC last night at Tim Hortons Field. This was one of the more dominant performances we've seen this season, certainly from both Forge as well as, any club within the Canadian Premier League going up against FC Edmonton. This was an unfortunate game of breaks for FC Edmonton, because talking to Alan Koch after the match, they knew that this was going to be a hot one. And trust me, it absolutely was. Even up in the air-conditioned press box, I was hot. So I can only imagine what it was like down on field level. But, they're out there hoping that they can get just to that first hydration break, knowing that those hydration breaks exist. They're hoping that they can get there a minute before Wobens Pacius scores his first goal of the match. And then from there, he scores a penalty. And then at that point, you're looking just to get to halftime, maybe reorganize. Well, because of that hydration break, there's 2 more minutes added. And what do Forge do? They only go and score twice during those. Actually, it's 4 minutes added, but they only go and score twice during those 4 minutes, including, if you're watching the show right now, an Olympico from Kyle Becker that was absolutely brilliant. Just a strong performance from Forge that, really, again, showed what they're capable of.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And it is a tough one for Edmonton. I mean, side note, Alan's absolutely right. It's very hot here in Ontario at the moment. I mean, I think I'm also kind of trying to get to hydration breaks during this show. I like when we play clips and stuff, because I can go cool off a little bit. But this is Forge at their best. They've had games this season where they just seem to turn it on, and it happens often early in his games. You see, a move work out well, or they score early, and you're like, okay, this is that Forge today. That's what we're getting today. They did it in Halifax. They did it against Pacific at home. They did it twice now against Edmonton at home. They have these games where, it starts to fall for them, and they just look like that ruthless, aggressive, dangerous team that we all know that they can be, and they have been largely for 3.5 years now. And I think the most important thing from this game is just that confidence was back. They've got that kind of that swagger in the attack, where they're always going to get to that final third, and they do that against any team in the league. Pretty much, you'd say every game they've played this year, they get to the final third quite easily. And sometimes it's just it doesn't happen for them once they get to the box or whatnot. But this game, Wobens Pacius really, really kind of reversing what has been largely one of the biggest problems for Forge this year. He's not hesitating with the ball, with those finishes, right? I think Bobby Smirnio just mentioned it after the game, but he can take a ball on a turn and just fire it. He's not waiting for that extra touch. He's not trying to set it up for himself perfectly. He's got that striker's instinct to just turn and shoot. And that's kind of the thing that Forge have needed so desperately this year, is to just take those goals when they present themselves, and trust yourself that you have the ability to finish them.
Yeah, and this was another match where they played against a side who was coming in to play defensively at Tim Hortons Field. And obviously that didn't go so well the last 2 times they played there, as both Ottawa and Valor, like you mentioned, Forge probably the better team in both those matches, had some really, really good chances to win both those matches, which made it even more frustrating. But they've showed a number of different looks in recent weeks in terms of breaking down these sides. And one of them has been their combinations down the right, where they're really having some success now that Rezar Rama is showing that impetus to go forward and that great passing ability and just all around good ball playing ability down the right. And obviously they have Chouanier there. In this match, they had Sissoko kind of shift over so that they could, find some joy down that right-hand side. And even in the second half, they brought on Taron Campbell, and he played kind of as a right winger, and his same thing, like he was able to be dominant in that side. And that was something Bobby was very thrilled about, was not only did they obviously score 5 goals and have a ton of chances in this match, but they had some different looks that, again, when you're breaking down a side who's going to sit back and shift and play defensively, having all kinds of different things, even set pieces as an option as well. Like that's all critical. You need a ton of different ways to score, and they know they're going to come up against low blocks basically all year in this league.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the toughest things to do in football is to break down a team that is really inviting you to press or to put pressure on them. And they're just trying to hold their lines and stay firm. So it's really impressive for Forge to maybe change things up a little bit. Usually they're a team that would say that they don't really care how the opposition plays. They're going to play their way. But in most cases in football, you do have to adapt a little bit to what the other team's giving you. And, knowing that in previous games, they tried to break down a block and they've struggled, but in this, they kind of come into this game expecting something similar. Edmonton often play with that 4 or 5 across the back, quite flat, and it's very tough to get around. So Forge to kind of overload the wide areas, especially that right side, Abu Sissoko coming out of midfield and playing more on the right in this game is, maybe sort of a wing back, I don't know, kind of roll out there. To have that maybe extra body on the wide area rather than in the middle, maybe help Forge get around and get those crosses in and get those touches into the box a little bit faster and a little bit more easily to break down this block. And obviously when you score a few goals, then it becomes increasingly easy to break down the block because the other team has to stretch themselves. They have to come out a little bit more after that. So yeah, I think this is pretty much exactly how Forge wanted this game to go down, minus the 1 goal they conceded. But for the most part, I think they'll be very, very happy with getting back to some of their fundamentals.
Well, let's take a quick hydration break here and hear from Bobby Smirniotis, his thoughts on the match.
In the first 10 or so minutes, just missing a little bit of quick connectivity. That's some things that we do very well. I thought we were a little bit slow with the ball. One thing we asked to start was just let the ball move very quickly in whatever we do. Obviously the conditions were a little bit difficult to start the game. It cooled off as time went on. But I thought after that first 10 to 15 minutes, the guys were very good, brilliant. We started spinning some balls in behind and finding the spaces that we knew were there against them, just in the way we studied them. And once we started doing that, then the field started tilting down towards their goal. And the guys took care of business in the first 45 minutes of the game.
They certainly did take care of business. And, the man who took care of business more than anyone else, Wobens Pacius, now second in the Golden Boot race, actually second all time in terms of Forge FC players' goals scored in all competitions, which is kind of crazy considering how short he's been with that club. He's now tied with David Chouanier, but like you said, Pacius is a player who's starting to really take his opportunities. That wasn't the case earlier in the season. I think last time we watched them play against Edmonton, it was the 3-0 at home. That was a match where Pacius came on late and missed a number of chances. And, that seemed to be the story of his early part of the season. But now he's really starting to bury them. And you can see that confidence really building up.
Yeah. And that's exactly what he needs. He went through a stretch last season where the same thing kind of happened. He got 1 goal in the net, and then it seemed like for the next month or so, he was quite consistently banging them in for Forge. And he is, again, a player who needs service, which he's getting with Forge now. He needs to, as I said, trust himself to just take that one-touch finish, to take it on the turn and just blast it, because he doesn't need to hesitate. He doesn't need to cut it onto his right foot because his left foot's not bad as well. He just needs to take these chances, and that's exactly what he did here.
And speaking of getting service, Pacius spoke about that after the match.
I feel great. It's really nice. But again, it's it's because of my teammates. You know, I'm a striker. I do my runs, but if the ball doesn't come, I can't score. If I don't receive good passes, I can score. So, again, it's nice to have that record, you know. But again, it's because of my teammates. So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, there was no question that was a pretty shocking result last night at Tim Hortons Field. Alan Koch even calling it men against boys at times. But there was another potentially even more shocking game last night. Obviously, it didn't have 5 goals in it. It just had the one. But York United, for the first time in more than 2 months, picking up a victory in probably the least expected place that you would, anticipate them getting a result this season against Cavalry FC on the road, where Cavalry's been perfect this year, where they've been excellent throughout their history in the Canadian Premier League. Charlie, you were on this match. Your thoughts on, again, just a surprise result and at long last for York United.
Yeah, this is a huge result for York. 10 games without a win in the league. They hadn't won on the road. They'd scored 1 goal away from home in the CPL so far this season. Things were pretty bleak for them at the moment heading into this game, especially after the loss to Pacific on Friday, which we'll get to in a bit. But this is just such a massive kind of morale boost for this team. It's so unbelievably difficult to go to Spruce Meadows and win. Note, Cavalry were 5-0 to start the year at home. They hadn't dropped anything there. So for York to go there and win, and not just win, but hold a clean sheet against one of the most high-powered attacks in the league is unbelievable. I think I looked it up yesterday. Cavalry have only failed to score at home, I think, 4 times in their history. And there's only one other team that's beaten them in a CPL match and held a clean sheet in that game, and that's Forge. And they did it in Cavalry's first ever loss back in 2019, and then again in the second leg of the 2019 final. So that just kind of puts in perspective how difficult it is for any team to do this at Cavalry, at Akio Field, but especially not a team that's in kind of tough form and hasn't been scoring and has conceded a lot of goals in recent weeks. So it's a massive game for York, to just finally break that streak. And sometimes all you need is a difficult win, one where you kind of grind it out. Obviously, they did a lot of defending in this game. I think on paper, you look at pretty much all the major stats from this game, you'd say that Cavalry were the better team. And I think in many ways, York would probably agree. But there are games like this that are going to happen where you just do a lot of defending. You trust your goalkeeper a little bit, and you scored early, so you can sit back quite comfortably, and it just eventually comes off for you. And that's something that can start a good run for a team.
Yeah, what a difference maker depth makes for a club in so many different aspects. I mean, obviously, Krat coming in and getting a goal that doesn't ultimately earn them a result, but that's another offensive option. You see Luis Lowry Latancio get the assist on their goal in the match against Cavalry, and Tas Mordekudis filling in very nicely on the defensive role. I certainly want to hear a little bit more about him, Charlie, but also just the option, you go down to 10 men and you can make a shift in the midfield where you bring off Hernandez and bring on Cedric Toussaint. That's something that you couldn't do just a couple of weeks ago, probably because Toussaint was suspended, but like little options like that, where when the match isn't going your way, you can actually just make some shifts. This hasn't been something that Martin Nash has been able to do in recent weeks. So how big is that?
Yeah, it makes such a massive difference. Just the fact that Martin Nash is actually able to adjust his team during games. He's able to look back at his bench and see professional players that he has trained in the last few weeks, rather than some recent games where it's mostly emergency signings or development call-ups or players that he hadn't actually really met before the game because they just had so many injuries and so many suspensions. And obviously the latter of those two is self-inflicted and something that they continue to struggle with, as Jordan Wilson is now returning from suspension and will be suspended again. So that's not great for this team, but it's just massive for York that they have these options to come on. The Toussaint sub was, I think, the best indicator of this, that they're able to not just bring fresh legs off the bench, but bring on players that offer them something different and allow them to adjust to the situation. Toussaint obviously being maybe more of a holding defensive presence than Mateo Hernandez can be, who's a little bit more attack-minded, a little more creative. And in a game where you're leading, you're down to 10 men, I think you probably sacrifice that creativity for a little bit more structure in the back. So that's massive for this team. But I think the other thing that impressed me with York in this game is, Mitchell, as you mentioned, these two Australians on that left side with Tas Mortakudas in that back three, and then Laurie Latanzio as kind of a left wing back in this game. I think that this is his first start, and I thought he was really, really good for York. He did a lot of defensive work. I think he led the team in tackles attempted and duels won and all these sorts of things. But his contribution to the goal as well is very clever, to take a touch and cut it back for himself. And I don't really know where Elijah Adekubi was going on the marking in that, but he spots the gap, feeds it right through to Asazi Di Rosario, and then it's one of those one-touch finishes. As I mentioned, Forge were scoring, but that's something that York hadn't been scoring for a long time. Is those goals in front of the 6-yard box? Those maybe, I don't want to say easier ones, but the ones that you would more expect to finish rather than massive 15, 18-yard finishes that they've had to score in recent games. So a lot of positives for York from this game. They're far from fixed. When you get dominated off the ball for such a long period of the game and you give up so many shots, you want to improve on that, but just to end that skid, to get back into winning ways, is just huge for this team.
Yeah, let's hear from York United coach Martin Nash.
I mean, we put a tremendous fight up today, and we knew we had to come in here. 5 wins in the trot, and haven't lost 11. Probably they've been the best team in the league, and to come here and get a win, a result, let alone a win, is fantastic. So proud of the guys. They stuck together. They worked as a unit the whole game, and it was an amazing effort.
Yeah, really an amazing effort, and one of those players who put up a great effort as well is Nico Giansopoulos in net. He'd obviously been injured in recent weeks, but how big is it to have him back and just I guess leading that back line, and obviously especially when there's some new faces coming in.
Oh yeah, it's massive to have a guy like him at the back who's a very vocal leader, especially when they're defending against so many set pieces, which Cavalry is unbelievably good at scoring from. So for York to defend so many of them, largely because of Giansopoulos, directing traffic during those situations, is huge. He's playing in a stadium he knows very well, having been at Cavalry for a couple years. It probably feels pretty good for him to get that win in that stadium. Obviously, Tommy Wheeldon Jr. said after the match that he's been impressed with how Nico's gone about things at York, but he always knew that he was a goalkeeper capable of this. And for him to be that presence at the back, to claim crosses, to make those saves when he has to, is just huge for this team at the moment.
Yeah, let's hear from Nico Giansopoulos.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Last year I wanted to get my chance. It didn't come, so when I was flying here this time, really wanted to put in a show, and glad it worked out. So it was a fun game, and just happy to get the 3 points and kind of end our rough patch there, and hopefully we can kind of use that and continue success now, second half of this season.
And why not? Let's continue the Nico Giansopoulos love on the show, and let's hear that Tommy Wheeldon Jr. quote after the match about him always knowing that Nico was a great starter.
Listen, we always thought we had 2 solid starting goalkeepers when he was here, and he's shown to be a very, very good goalkeeper. Look, York have one of the fewest goals against for a reason, right? They are very, very defensive and try to take you on transition. They did, but it was our error that their goal came from. So look, we'll own it today. We apologise to the fans for not keeping the unbeaten run going. We at least want to give them goals to cheer for. We didn't do that tonight, but there's always a next game.
There is always the next game, and for York United, they did have another match as well this week. So, Charlie, you were also on that one, and a match that turned out obviously quite differently. If there was no goals to celebrate in this match, there were certainly a ton of goals to celebrate in that one. Charlie, take us through this 4-2 match between Pacific and York.
This was a very, very profoundly weird game. Two teams in quite different form. It looked for large stretches of this game that it was going to be the moment that York broke this skid. Ronan Kratt right off the bat here with this goal. That's a great moment for him. I know his dad was in the stands and he was very happy as well. We could see him celebrating. It was a game where York played, I think, some of their best football of the year for large parts, especially the first half. I think they were probably the better team, but you give up a penalty towards the end, and that's always a bit of a killer to go into halftime equal. And then Isaiah Johnston with that phenomenal run through midfield to set up Di Rosario's goal. They go back ahead. And then for the next, I think, 10 minutes after that, York were dominant. They had so many chances. Di Rosario hit the crossbar again. Krat hit the post. And if they just finished off one of those, I think this game goes extremely differently. But maybe the beauty of what Pacific FC can do is that they can find these chances in transition and they can just be ruthless from these opportunities. Alejandro Diaz has that incredible striker's instinct to find the spot that the pass is going to come to and to finish these chances and put a team away, even when, you know, the game hasn't been going their way. They haven't had a lot of the ball. The buildup hasn't always been there. So I think that is part of the thing that separates these two attacking units. But honestly, at you know, as a whole, if you took both of York's games that we're talking about together, I'd say they probably played better against Pacific, even though that's the game they lost. And that's weird to say, but they had more of the ball. They had more sustained opportunities in the attacking half. They, you know, looked a little bit better. This was the first time they'd attacked with a slightly different unit, a bit of a sort of 3-4-3 with Isaiah Johnston and more of an advanced kind of false nine, number 10 strange sort of role. That's kind of hard to quantify. But it was a lot of improvement for them. Obviously the toughest part of that is Max Ferrari going down again with an injury. And it sounds like that might keep him out for a little while. And that hurts because York have been struggling so much to replace Deity and Abzi on the left side. It looked like they might have found a solution there, but it might be back to the drawing board now. But again, Pacific, this 4-4-2 that they've played these last three games, they just keep scoring, and that's been very impressive to me as well.
Yeah, before we move on to Pacific, I wanted to quickly mention something that you talked about in your match analysis, which for York is a big pressing thing right now, which is as they push forward and try to score all of these goals, how important it is to keep that defensive resiliency that has been kind of at their core all season. How big is that, obviously, in terms of what they're trying to do right now? That, you know, again, you need the goals, but obviously preventing them is just as important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's been kind of the fundamental of this team for especially the early part of the season, is how well organized they were defensively, how tough they were to break down, how much they really gave you nothing, especially in the box, in the half spaces, you know, with their holding midfield as well, just doing such a good job of pushing opposing teams to the outside. But, you know, when you go through a stretch for so long where you're not scoring and it's costing you a lot in the results department, you have to change things up and you have to find new ways to get on the ball in the attacking half. You have to find ways to score goals, really, because that's how you win football matches. But sometimes if you go too far down that road, you sacrifice a little bit of what's been so good for you at the back. And that did seem to be what had been happening for York in these past couple of weeks. This Pacific game especially, you know, Martin Nash tries something completely new in attack, and he admits post-match that they were a little bit stretched, and that maybe caused them some troubles in transition. You know, that I think all at least three of Pacific's goals, and then the play leading to the penalty, came from that same side, where York were maybe a little bit weaker defensively because they were trying to get so high up the pitch on that side. But then obviously in Cavalry, when you go down to 10 men, you go back to fundamentals and you make it hard. You head balls out of the box. You're no nonsense with your clearances. And I think that once they find a way to kind of mesh these two things together to still be able to be dynamic in attack while not sacrificing that structure at the back, then they'll be in good shape.
Well, if York want to learn anything about scoring goals, all they needed to do is look across the pitch on Friday, because Pacific have been doing it in bunches lately. Probably also could use a little more structure at the back, as they've been leaking a lot of goals in recent matches. But this was another one where, you know, they scored 4. They've had all kinds of chances as well. It's looked much better. You mentioned the new 4-4-2 formation, how much that's been helping out. One player I wanted to key in on, who I think's been very, very good for them down the last little bit, has been Gianopoulos, who against Cavalry sets up a couple of the chances and scores himself. Has just been a player who, you know, earlier in the year was maybe a bench player or didn't always get the starting role, but recently has really, really been a threat for Pacific.
Yeah, he absolutely has. And I think we might have mentioned this before, but it's impressive to see him so patient waiting for his opportunity. He was here at Pacific all of last season, and he did quite well in his opportunities. But again, he's not starting week in, week out. And then this season starts, and it's that rigid front three that they've always played with. But then the goals dry up a little bit, and he gets his opportunity, and he seizes it so well. And he's just been so dynamic. He's played, I think, on both wings now, and he's played up front a little bit more as well. He's so dynamic anywhere he is. He's great on the dribble, and he's got that ability that you have to respect where he's able to shoot from distance. So, sometimes that creates space for other attacking players alongside him because he can draw in a defender and he can play that pass through. And then sometimes the goal falls for him as well, and he does a backflip, and it's really cool. So yeah, I think this entire front four for Pacific has been really clicking, in especially the last 3 games, and it's surprising that they were able to completely change the way they attack just to get more bodies in the box. But it's been working out very well for them, I think.
Yeah, the player who's probably been working out best for is Alejandro Diaz, who now leads the Golden Boot race by 3 goals. Obviously, Pacius, who we talked about earlier, has played less matches, but Diaz also scoring a hat trick in this one. What is it about Diaz that he continues to, even on a club that has struggled to score goals at times, just simply score?
Yeah, it's that striker's instinct, right? I think that this is something that you see at many levels of the game in football is, a player will score so many goals, and then you'll look at a highlight reel of them and he'd be like, well, most of those aren't that impressive. Like, he just found a loose ball and he finished it. But when you do it that consistently, that's what makes a player good, right? That's what makes a true striker, a proper number 9, so effective, is their ability to score, for lack of a better term, the easy goals by finding those spaces, by evading defenders, by finding exactly the pocket where, there might be space for them to just score that easy finish. And then to actually finish that pretty much every time the ball comes to you is a skill as well. So just to make yourself available and trust your wingers and your other striker that they are going to find you, that they know where you're going to be, and where they're going to play that pass, where they like to put their cut back or their cross or whatever. That is a massive skill. And it's something that Alejandro Diaz has. And it's, part of the quality of his pedigree, obviously coming from Mexico and playing in some very, very top games down there, coming from one of the top academies in really all of the Americas in Club America. So that's what makes him so special, is his just intelligence to find those pockets and finish those one-touch goals. Again, as we've mentioned a couple times on this show.
Let's hear from the Pacific striker after the York United match.
We had pretty tough games against York. We know York is a really good team, and it's complicated to play against them. We needed this win to build that confidence up, and because we knew those 3 games we played before, we knew this one had to be for us. So pretty happy because of the result. Everyone was working hard. We were supporting each other. So I think that's a great sign for the team, and super excited about that.
And Pacific coach James Merriman, speaking of happy, was happy with his club's resilience in this match.
Happy with the resiliency and to stay in it and not lose ourselves or get too low, right? Conceding first minute of the match and then conceding straight away in the second half is not easy in terms of momentum and believing, but it didn't stop. We kept going, we kept attacking, so really happy with that. And I told you we were going to score goals today. We wanted to go forward and we wanted to attack. Our forwards, Daniels, DeSantos, Diaz, Josh coming on, Bustos, they're very, very dangerous. They're loving to attack freely right now, and happy for Diaz and happy for G.
James did promise me that he was going to score goals because I saw him that morning because we were doing some interviews with Pacific ahead of that CONCACAF League game next week. And James did promise me that they were going to go to York Lions Stadium and score some goals because they'd had 2 0-0 draws in the league with York so far this year. So I'm glad that he did not let me down.
Yeah, there you go. And that's a good plug because obviously we will have a bunch of stuff coming up on the website about Pacific's CONCACAF League run. And this is a good sign, I think. Obviously, as we said, the defensive side of the game maybe needs some shaping up for Pacific, but in competitions like this, being able to score your way out of trouble, especially in some hostile and difficult environments, is going to be critical for Pacific. And having that confidence going into this competition for them is big.
Oh yeah, it's the perfect time for this to be clicking. They're also going to get Manny Aparicio back after that York game, which was his last game of his suspension, which will be massive. But for them to start clicking, to start finding their identity back, which to me has been largely that they play some of the most attractive and entertaining attacking football in the entire CPL. So for them to be back and entertaining and dynamic and just ruthless on the attack, especially with pace and all that, it's awesome. It's been a lot of fun to see this return from Pacific after that sort of down stretch. And as you mentioned, it's at a perfect time with them heading, I believe, down to Jamaica on Tuesday next week to play Waterhouse, which is going to be a very difficult game, but a massive one for that club who really has high ambitions of continuing to represent Canada on the international stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously, like we said, stay locked into CanPL.ca because we'll have a lot coming up on all of that in the next few weeks. One final match to get to that happened since the last show, and it feels like a long time ago because it was last Thursday. Halifax taking on Cavalry at
That was a long
Field.
time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago at this point. This match seemed to go how every Halifax trip to Calgary has gone this year, where Halifax were actually probably the better side in the opening half. Sam Salter had a very good chance to open the scoring in the early part of the game and couldn't do it. And then they suffer a red card. Jeremy Gagnon-Lapare getting sent off, and that really opened things up for Cavalry. Not immediately. They needed to make a double sub at halftime, actually bringing on Elijah Adekubi and Ben Fisk, because they really weren't actually controlling the midfield very well, even without Gagnon-Lapare in there. But they're able to, in the space of 8 minutes, score 3 times. Ali Musi, an excellent match. And another interesting one in this game, because we always talk about the depth of Cavalry. All 3 of their goals set up by defenders, both fullbacks getting in and in on the action, and Karifa Yao as well, a brilliant ball through the middle. So they can hurt you in a million different ways, and they definitely showed that the second that Cavalry went down a man in this one.
Yeah, that fullback play from Cavalry is pretty crazy to me, especially considering how Bradley Vliet and Roberto Alarcon are not the starting fullbacks that Tommy Wheeldon Jr. expected to have at the start of the year, right?
Yeah.
But they've had so many injuries in those spots. Obviously, Tom Field went down at the start of the year. Fraser Aird suffered that injury about a month into the season. But they've been able to incorporate these new players so quickly mid-season. Alarcon just got here, and he's already been playing so well in that fullback role for Cavalry, who are a team that need attacking fullbacks, right? With the way that they want to play, especially some of the directness they want to play with. So that's been massive for them and been so impressive. And again, this game just shows how ruthless they can be if you just give them an inch, and they'll take that mile, because as you mentioned, Halifax did a lot of things right in this game. They clogged up the midfield the way that they're so good at doing, especially in the first half for the most part. But again, it's just a tough break, a very tough break for Halifax with Gagnon-Lapare getting sent off. I don't have a lot to say on the call itself. I do know that it sounds like Halifax are appealing the call, so they'll possibly get Jeremy back rather than losing him for the 3 matches that I think that red card would automatically give him. And that would be big for them because he's been such an important piece of their midfield this season. But again, Cavalry just able to adapt. They're able to take their chances. The contrast, I guess, between this game and the York game is that Cavalry take their chances in this game. They find those more transitional moments. Obviously, Halifax giving them maybe more of those transitional moments because they're not actually quite sitting back as much as York were. So that allows Cavalry to be able to play those through balls, for example, into Ali Musi or to whip in those crosses behind the back line. I don't think it would be really possible to get behind York's back line in that game on Tuesday night. But in this game, Cavalry are able to find ways in behind there, and they've got a little bit more pace to be able to get on those balls, and that's where they can really kill you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing about this Cavalry FC side is, they're just so they have such a strong structure within the club that these guys like Alarcon and Vliet can come in and just immediately fit into the system and don't look out of place at all. And obviously both of those players have proven to be incredibly talented, and I think are going to quickly become pretty household names within the Canadian Premier League, considering what they've shown so far. But at the same time, usually it takes a bit longer for players who are coming into a side to fit the system and look as comfortable as they did. But they look like they've been playing for the side for months or not longer, and it's been a couple matches for honestly both of them.
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing, and this is something that Cavalry do very well and Forge do very well in the CPL, is they're able to bring players in and have them hit the ground running like that very quickly, because there's such a set identity in the way that they play, the way that they train, and it's very easy to, or well, it's certainly not easy, but it's smoother for a player to come into training and get acquainted. Okay, this is going to be my role in this game. This is what I have to do. You can ease in a little bit with fewer responsibilities and eventually take on more for yourself as a player. But having so much of this set identity, having so many players, I think, still in the squad that have been there for at least a couple of years, that know how things work at this club, that know that identity very well, that helps. And then just having all that quality around you on the pitch, it helps your own quality kind of come out if you're a player like Bradley Vliet or Roberto Alarcon, who again just have been so impressive with their confidence to take on those roles, to whip in those dangerous crosses and get their names on the score sheet so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a Halifax point of thing, it seems to be a heat wave going across Canada right now. I'm no meteorologist, but that was another super hot one. Yeah, that's fair. The whole world at this point, but that was another hot one out in Calgary, and that made it less than ideal that that Halifax had only 10 men on the day. Let's hear from Peter Shala about how difficult that was for them.
We go down a man in this heat. Obviously, now you're missing a man, you have to run more. So on a day like this, it's really, really hard to make up. We took the draw into the halftime, which was positive, and then we tried to regroup. Just try to keep a clean sheet, try to defend as much as we can, and maybe take our opportunities if we get a few. Unfortunately, went the other way, so nothing we can change about it now.
Yeah, and even, despite that, despite being a man up and having most of the ball, Cavalry actually struggled a little bit to really take a foothold in this match. But, a shift at halftime and bringing on, like I said, Fisk and Elijah Adekubi kind of changed things for them. So let's hear from Tommy Wheeldon Jr. about what their side did.
I didn't like our shape in the first half, even before the sending off. I wasn't happy with it. I thought we were off balance in our build out, couldn't create an overload. And even we didn't really respond when we had it. It was too chaotic. So I thought Elijah's really, desperate to be on the ball and get more playing time. Joe DiCaro was on a yellow, so we wanted to protect because we could see they were going after him. And Ben Fisk is very intelligent. And what that then ended up doing is we played more of a controlled performance and allowed us then to slip balls through to Ali, to Sergio, to our fullbacks, just give us better balance. So it was a tactical change.
Well, there you go. I mean, again, you don't get to the unbeaten run that they had without being able to shift things very quickly within matches, and Cavalry showing that very well once again. And let's shift things within this show. Let's bring on Benedict Rhodes, who is in action tonight in terms of covering Atletico Ottawa versus Valor FC, and has honestly been in action throughout the past couple of weeks very heavily, as he's been working on the Canadian women's national team beat for us as well. So we'll talk about both of those things with Benny, but let's start with Valor Ottawa. This is a pretty big match, especially I think for a Valor side who are trying to keep pace with that front four that's starting to pull away a little bit. And they have an opportunity here to, have some direct damage on a team in front of them.
Yeah, had Forge not won last night, Valor would have had a chance to jump into that top four today. They won't now, of course, but they're now 4 points back. But this is a huge game for Valor. You said they have a couple of games in hand on the teams above them, and If they can win this game, they definitely put themselves in that conversation. And let's not forget as well, but what Ottawa can do if they win this game, they'll jump into top spot, jump over Cavalry after Cavalry's loss last night.
Yeah, before we get to Ottawa, I just want to talk about Valor a little bit here, because there's something that I'm concerned about with them, especially for this game against Ottawa. We mentioned at the top of the show that William Akio is gone. He's at Ross County. He's been a huge part of that front four they've attacked with. Alessandro Rigi's also suspended for this game. So that's two of their regular starting front four. Ben, you've watched some Valor this year. How big of a loss is this? How do they maybe cope with these losses, especially against the Ottawa side that's so difficult to score against?
Yeah, like I know Phil DeSantos doesn't like mentioning the 6-1 game, so I'll try to not do it too much. But it'd be hard not to mention, William Akio's influence in that game. Like he was everywhere. He was the best player on the pitch, even though he don't think he had a goal or assist in that game. But he was running the show, and as he's done several times for Valor, I mean, he's capable of doing some great things. So that's definitely a big hole to fill. You said Rigi as well would probably be one of the natural replacements, or one of the natural players to fill in the lineup somewhere. And he's also won't be available for this match, so it'll definitely be interesting to see who they bring in. I know Phil DeSantos is high on some international players that he's brought in recently. They're starting to get fit and integrated into the squad, so it'll be interesting to see who he brings into this game.
Yeah, Daniel Ascanio was really good in that last game against Halifax. He was awesome. Kevin Rendon is a kind of a more creative midfielder, which is something that they don't necessarily have at Valor. So maybe this is an opportunity to try something different with the way that you play, the way that you attack, maybe get a little bit more creativity from midfield. But sorry, Mitchell, I cut you off there.
No, all good. Well, speaking of just getting healthier, obviously, I don't think it's any coincidence that 3 on the trot comes with Andrew Jean-Baptiste making his return. How big has he been for Valor?
Yeah, like we saw the start of last season, he was an MVP player through those first 70 games, I believe it was, before he went down with his injury, and they really missed him. And now that he's back and he's available again, we're starting to see he's just a steady presence. He's the captain. He's an important leader on and off the pitch as well for that team. And in the air, he wins almost everything. Every corner is aimed at his head. Every defensive corner, he's the one trying to clear out of there. So he's absolutely crucial for them on set pieces and from open play. And definitely returning to the lineup was a huge boost for Phil DeSantos.
I think I keep forgetting that Valor's on a 3-game winning streak because it's been so long since they've played. But the same is true of Atletico Ottawa, who I think are actually one more day off since their last game. I don't know. I don't know how to judge this time off. Obviously, I think if you're on a hot streak like Valor, you kind of prefer to stay in a rhythm and keep going. But Benedict, I don't know. Who do you think this layoff or this extra rest time, extra training time benefits more in this game?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think Valor will have wanted to stay in that hot streak. Ottawa did play a few games in a row back then. They played against Halifax, Forge, and Cavalry within 10 days, I think. So I think they'll be happy with some time off to kind of get off their feet a little bit. But so I do think this actually favors them more than it favors Valor.
I agree with Benny on that. I think there's different clubs that have different opinions on it. Bobby Smirniotis was
hates it.
Even last night, Bobby was just grumbling. Even after winning 5-1, he was just grumbling about how many days they had off in between matches. Carlos Gonzalez has actually been a manager who said sometimes that he really likes having this. And I mean, for one of those things, Ottawa's been able to stay pretty healthy this season. And I think they've done that by using these breaks very, very well as I think just brilliant game management throughout the season. But they really like to use these breaks to really focus on opponents. So I do think that Benny's right, and that this does benefit Ottawa more than Valor. What about this game from an Ottawa perspective? Obviously, a bit of revenge on their minds. Maybe we again, this is probably the most brought up results in the CPL this season for good reason, but also the one that everyone's very quick to discount. But as not an indication fully of either side. But again, it's still got to be in Ottawa's mind.
Yeah, of course it is. But I think Phil and Carlos both said, they're trying to put that game behind them. Like Phil said, it feels like it was last year, even like he's just completely putting it in the review window. And another interesting thing to know, right, is the two times they played each other, the away team has won both times. So I think that'll be something to watch as well in this game if Valor can, kind of use that, and try and see what worked well for them in that match. Obviously, Willie McKeel worked well for them in that match. He's no longer available, but I think definitely Valor will be coming into this one hoping to get another win on the road.
Charlie, considering the styles they both play, is it any surprise that the away team has won both matches in this series?
Yeah, I guess it's not surprising. It's a good point because Ottawa are so well equipped to go on the road and defend very well, especially when they do it in that. Sometimes they do it in that back five, and it's very effective. And Valor, with just how well they can hit you in transition and counterattack you. Maybe they can't as much without William Akio or Alessandro Rigi. That's, I guess, something that, as we've mentioned, we're going to have to find out starting tonight. But Ottawa is still, in my mind, the better of these two teams, especially at the moment. Even though Valor have played quite well recently, I think that Ottawa will be again very hungry to be back at home and to again avenge that loss as you guys mentioned, and go back into that tie with Cavalry at the top of the table. When they see a team they're chasing like Cavalry drop points as they did to York, the best teams are the ones that capitalize on that and put themselves right back level, right? So when your rival blinks, you have to strike at that exact moment, and this is kind of the perfect spot for Ottawa to do so before they have to obviously go to York on Sunday and play another tough game against a team that has been difficult for them to break down as well.
Yeah, busy week in the Canadian Premier League. Busy weekend. We'll get to that shortly. That match, of course, going tonight at 7 p.m. At TD Place Stadium. That is, of course, a delayed game, which factors into this as well a little bit in terms of, at least neither side was sure if they were going to play over the weekend. Now it's being played midweek. Yeah. The preparations differ for that. So worth factoring in as well. But Benedict, obviously you've been on the Canadian women's national team beat for the past week or two, as well as they played in the CONCACAF W Championship. They qualified for the World Cup. Fell just short of qualifying for the Olympics. Obviously they still have an opportunity to do that. But as a whole, what do you make of this, first big outing, let's call it, following Olympic gold?
Yeah, I think for the most part it was kind of on expectation. I think qualifying for the World Cup was a must. Like I think if they didn't do that, it would have been an abject failure. But they did, of course. They did. Then beating Jamaica in the semifinal was obviously as well an expectation. And they knew the United States were going to be the toughest game of this tournament, and that's exactly what they were. The United States were one of the only teams that really attacked them. I think for the first 4 games of the tournament, it was all Canada running the show and Canada on the front foot for all 4 matches, and then the United States were the ones on the front foot on the final on Monday, and it took a penalty to beat them, as it took a penalty to beat the United States in the semifinal of the Olympics last year. So these teams are very evenly matched, and I think we're starting to see Canada start to realize they can play at the level of the United States, but again they fell just short this time.
Yeah, I'm still not 100% convinced that Canada can quite match that level of the United States. I think that the US are still just that little step ahead of Canada. I think that Canada just didn't do enough to win that game in that final. I know that they lost on that penalty, and it's a bit of a controversial call, but I think that the U.S. were objectively the better team for very large parts of that game. As you mentioned, though, from this tournament, Benedict, it's objective number 1 is complete, qualifying for the World Cup. I would still say that it is an abject failure if they don't qualify for the Olympics as well.
Agreed.
So you got to beat Jamaica in that playoff, which it sounds like it's in next September, not this September. Which is kind of a strange one. I honestly thought that it was like this week, right after the tournament.
It's a week after the World Cup as well.
Yeah, so that's very bizarre, but you have to win that game, like unquestionably, or 2 games. I don't know how that format works yet. But Again, Benedict, just from watching this tournament so closely, what players from this Canadian team have stood out to you most, especially maybe some of the younger ones who are starting to break into this side more?
Yeah, I think the obvious one is Julia Grosso. I think we didn't really expect her to win the Golden Boot. I don't think, but she had 3 goals and an assist in this tournament, and she was immense. She only started one of the matches, I believe, which is maybe a little bit disappointing as well. I think we spoke on this podcast before how we wanted to see her start with Quinn and Fleming in midfield. So it's interesting to see her not start either of the last 2 games or the final group game. But she played a huge part to play, and I found a stat here courtesy of about a different player. At XG is for nerds on Twitter. We do our nerdy stats on this show. So shout out to them. And there was a stat here that says Janine Becky created 33 chances in this tournament across 5 matches, which is over 3 times the next closest person, which is 6.5 per game. So she was immense in this tournament as well. Only had 2 assists to show for it. I think she had a goal as well in the first game, and the stats weren't necessarily there, but everything was going through Janine Becky in this tournament, and she was immense on that right wing.
That will be the last time anyone does any math on this show while I'm in charge of it. So,
but that's enough of that.
Yeah, absolutely not, Benedict. But yeah, I guess before we wrap up, that is such a bizarre, formatting thing for Canada that now they have to wait a couple years to find out if they're going to the Olympics. And obviously they'll be fresh off lifting a World Cup trophy and have to play in this this match against Jamaica. But what are your thoughts on that decision to have this Olympic qualifying tournament so early and then have the playoff so far later?
Yeah, I like the idea of the CONCACAF W Championship. I think that's a great tournament, and I like how it qualifies for the World Cup. But what I don't understand is why it's second versus third place to qualify for the Olympics when you have the top 2 teams playing in the final. That to me doesn't make sense. That's how it's worked in previous cycles, and I don't personally understand that decision, especially if you're making them wait a year and a half. If it was this week, as Charlie said, or maybe in a month, maybe even, I think second versus third is an interesting prospect, but to have the second versus third a year, way more than a year from now, it doesn't make sense.
I don't hate the idea of having more opportunities for the CONCACAF teams that aren't Canada and the US to get to major tournaments and give those opportunities. Mitchell is just gone. He doesn't want to hear about it at all. He hates this idea. But I think one of the factors here is that in theory, I think that they would have expected it to be Mexico in that 3rd place spot, right? That's probably one of the biggest stories of this W Championship is how disappointing Mexico were in not even getting out of their group, and especially after so much improvement that they've made over the last couple of years, for them to really struggle in this tournament and not be that 3rd place team. All the credit in the world to Jamaica, who were very good, but for it not to be Mexico, I think is not something that CONCACAF expected, and I think that might have been one of the things that they considered when making this new format, is to give again, these other teams that aren't Canada and the US just that little bit of an extra chance of getting to a major tournament like the Olympics. I guess there's already World Cup qualification, but the Olympics as well, that they've been out of forever, really. But again, I think I'm with you. It's a weird format. It's a long time to wait. Who knows really what this Canadian team looks like next September? I think there could be quite a lot of things different with it. But at the end of the day, that's the format, and that's what you got to do.
Yeah,
welcome back, Mitch.
Yeah, apparently I disliked that format so much that I just left the show, got angry.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Absolutely, yeah. But something that never makes me angry is looking at the Canadian Premier League standings. So let's do that right now. And I mean, again, a bit of gaps opening up here. Like we said, that top 4 really forming. Valor kind of in the middle right now, and then you've got your bottom 3. Charlie, I guess just your thoughts on where things stand at the moment.
I just love this picture of the Cavalry coaching staff.
Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah,
it's just Nick Ledgerwood and Leon Hopgood just hanging out with Tommy. Anyway, yeah, it's fun. We're seeing a little bit more separation between the top 4 and bottom 4 than I think we've seen in some recent weeks. So that's interesting. It's obviously, I guess, on Valor mostly, maybe a little bit to a lesser extent Halifax, to see if they can close that gap. They'll probably have games against those top 4 coming up, and those are games where you have to get points and you have to take points off the teams that you're chasing. But again, we're seeing that maybe top four starting to become a little bit more congested because Forge aren't actually that far off Cavalry when you look at the games that they have in hand as well.
Yeah, and let's shift to the schedule then. And after a weekend off for all eight, or after a weekend off completely, all 8 teams are back in action this weekend. Starting off strong, we got a great match on Friday night, Pacific against Cavalry at 10 p.m. Starlight Stadium. You know, as we mentioned, both those clubs coming into this match pretty hot. So then you got your Saturday doubleheader. You got Forge against Valor, as well as Halifax hosting FC Edmonton, and then finishing up on Sunday with York United against Atletico Ottawa. Just a reminder, of course, our CPL predictor is up again this week. You can win $100 per week plus random draws to win other great prizes for those who play. The grand prize, of course, a trip for 2 to the CPL final. Boys, let's get some predictions. I'll go first. York Atletico Ottawa will end in a draw. That's there's mine out of the way. Charlie, I'm going to put you on the hard one. Yeah, Cavalry Pacific. What you got there?
Oh, okay. Well, last time these guys played, it was a 3-3 draw, right? I'm not wrong with that. Yeah, that was a pretty intense game. I think that was the one with red cards on both sides. Yeah, and I think Manny Aparicio is back for this game after getting suspended from the last meeting between these two. I'm going to go 3-2 Pacific.
Ooh, I like it. And Benny, let's go Forge Valor. It's another interesting one. Obviously 1-0 the last time they played at Tim Hortons Field for Valor.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one. You know, there's a potential playoff implications in the line. If Valor can win, they'll be 1 point back of Forge. And I think Forge has scored enough goals recently. I think Valor are going to maybe take this one. I'll say 1-0 Valor on the road.
Wow. Especially coming in after a Wednesday trip to Ottawa. That is a bold prediction from Benedict Rhodes, but we'll take it. Obviously, all of those games, as always, are available to watch on One Soccer. But that brings us to the end of our show this week. Our team and player of the week should be out tomorrow, so keep an eye for all that. And make sure to head over to CanPL.ca, as always, for all of your coverage of this weekend's matches and for today's match with Mr. Benedict Rhodes. He'll be covering that for you. So on behalf of Charlie O'Connor-Clark and the rest of the newsroom team, I'm Mitchell Tierney. Enjoy your soccer, folks.
Forward players by the spot break. Becker! Is that an Olympico? Kyle Becker gets it done from the corner again! Found Pacius. The supporters sense the hat trick is on a touch. Wobens! Hat trick again in the Canadian Premier League. Felt like destiny.